My word. A panel game devised by Tony Shrine and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
And we go straight into the first round, which tests their vocabulary. For 2 marks, what's the meaning of the following word? Beginning with Frank Muir. And Frank, your word is peripatetic.
It sounds like that's a Dickensian word. It sounds like a Sam Weller version of very pathetic. He's a peripatetic man. It means a Greek philosopher under the influence of alcohol made from pears, moving from place to place.
And, well, sort of by derivation and in common parlance, Frank.
Well, it means somebody on the hoof, moving about.
Hello, yes. It does mean mobile, moving from place to place. In your daily job, I mean, a peripatetic teacher of music would visit perhaps a dozen schools rather than being stuck at one of them. And Frank's quite right about the origin. Aristotle used to teach his students in the walks at the Lyceum in Athens, and the philosophers who followed him were called the Peripatetics. 2 marks. Anne Scott James, a Holocaust.
Somebody's been having a sort of rave up with the Greek dictionary. The caustic part means burning, of course.
Yes.
And the hollow part means total. So it means absolutely total burning.
By origin and...
Oh, those sacrifices, I think.
Yep. It is a comprehensive burnt offering. You burnt the whole of the animal on the altar, and hence, figuratively, some perfectly disastrous happening or destruction of life. 2 marks. Denis Norden, Rodomontade.
Yes, I know. I'm just trying to sort of work it out in my mind. It's one of those words that you accept that you know,
yeah,
and suddenly on a wireless program you're set to replying. An extravagant tirade, not noted for any degree of diffidence or modesty.
I give 2 marks to Denis. It comes from a character in poetry. In fact, Ariosto wrote a very, very long thing called Orlando Furioso, and he had this braggart, vain, boastful character called Rodomontade, and he's crept into the language, as Denis has illustrated. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, a panegyric.
A panegyric means a very, very great deal of praise, such as is offered to Anne and Denis and Frank. Always deserved, of course. It can, in modern Greece, mean a glorious meeting, a kind of festival, but really it just means a lot of absolutely well-deserved praise from everybody for everybody.
Fair enough, Dennis, you get your 2 marks. But what you said, it came to me, is I think its original meaning, because it originally meant the kind of eulogistic speech which was fit for a national festival, Agora being the market where everybody gathered. 2 marks.
I didn't know about that, but don't tell him.
I won't. Oh, before we go on to the next round, here are the quotations that Frank and Denis have been given for the last round of all. And Frank, your quotation is, any old iron. And yours, Denis, is, what you lose on the swings, you gain on the roundabouts. Well, now we have a round of poetical pairings. For 2 marks, we will quote the line or lines to which the following 2-word quotations belong, and if you can, identify the poem and the poet. Your words, Frank, are hungry generations.
Hungry generations say the nightingale.
Yeah, it is in fact the Nightingale, ode to.
Yes.
and it's no hungry generations tread thee down.
Quite right. It's oh yes, it's death, isn't it? Immortal bird.
Born for death, immortal
Yes.
bird.
All right, Keats's Ode to the Nightingale, the first two lines, I was not born for death, immortal bird, no hungry generations tread thee down, and then all about it being heard by the emperor and the clown and poor Ruth among the alien corn and so on. 2 marks. And Scott James, livelier Iris, I-R-I-S, livelier Iris.
Or something to do with Tennyson comes up here.
Quite right.
Well,
if I start...
in the spring a young man's
That's
fancy
right.
lightly turns to thoughts of love.
Yes. It's Locksley Hall, Tennyson. In the spring, a livelier iris changes on the burnished dove. In the spring, a young man's fancy lightly turns to thoughts of love. All right, you get your 2. Denis Norden, Duchess-Faced horse.
Well, I can't give you the surrounding, the actual nearby context of this. I can tell you an LP that it's on. It's on one that if anybody's got a record token, if they still call them that, it's on Dylan Thomas's record of A Child's Christmas in Wales.
Absolutely right, yes, yes.
And I can give you another line from it.
Well, let's have that one.
He's got a very fat uncle with braces straining like hawsers and breathing like a brass band.
Well, for knowing something which wasn't actually in the question, I'm going to give you your 2 marks anyway. The immediate surroundings of that Duchess-Faced horse are before the motor car, before the wheel, before the Duchess-Faced horse, when we rode the daft and happy hills bareback. 2 marks. Dylan Thomas, as Dennis quite rightly says, the poem A Child's Christmas in Wales. How Dilys Powell. Scrannel pipes. S-C-R-A-N-N-E-L. Scrannel pipes.
That's Milton.
Yes.
And it is which? Lycidas.
Yes, that's right.
Scrannel pipes of straw.
Yes, that'll do. It's Milton's Lycidas. He's attacking various sort of clerics and scholars whom he doesn't in the least approve of, and says their lean and flashy songs grate on their scrannel pipes of wretched straw. The hungry sheep look up and are not fed. Well, now we have a rather different round. This is a round of malicious misogynisms, succinct and unfair comments on the fair sex that have been made by sundry male chauvinist pigs. For 2 marks, who said or wrote these? The first to Frank Muir. Brigands demand your money or your life. Women require both.
What's unfair about that? Brigands is an interesting word to
Yes.
use, isn't it? Is it one of the Irish phrase makers?
No, it's an English one, and he went to nowhere and wrote about it.
Samuel Butler.
That's Samuel Butler, the second one, the one who lived between 1835 and 1902, not the one in the 17th century. And I think this comes from his notebooks, which were, well, pretty tart, weren't they?
I liked another thing he said in his notebooks. He said that, how kind of God to allow Carlyle and Mary to marry.
Yes.
In which case, only 2 people were unhappy instead of 4.
Yes, that's very typical.
Actually, that line was suggested to him by... He had a curious relationship with Miss Savage, wasn't
Yeah.
he? With this charming, sweet lady who sort of fell in love with him and eventually died, and he was mortified. He didn't realise that she was in love with him because he wasn't a marrying man. And she actually suggests that. She also wrote to him and said that, I saw Mr. Gladstone yesterday in the street. I waited and waited, but no cab ran him over. She was just as good a writer as he was.
Thank you, Frank. And Scott James, your turn. But, oh, ye lords of ladies intellectual, inform us truly, have they not hen-pecked?
It's
The
not
three
Job
names
and
are-
Sullivan, it's earlier, isn't it?
Earlier.
Not
It's,
Job.
it's
Yeah.
Browning, Byron, or Cole Porter.
Well, Byron's a good guess.
Yes, Byron will do.
Don Juan.
Yes,
Oh.
it's Don Juan. It's Byron, the first canto of Don Juan. The lords of ladies intellectual inform us truly, have they not hen-pecked? It's a terrible rhyme with intellectual, of course. 2 marks. Now, Denis Norden. Women are only children of larger growth. They have an entertaining tattle and sometimes wit. But for solid, reasoning, good sense, I never knew in my life one that had it, or who reasoned or acted consequentially for 24 hours together.
Either they're
Female
rising in a
murmur.
body out there. I like the bit that says, I never knew in my life one that had it. I presume he was rather... I don't know. It's a pretty boring statement.
A good letter writer.
Oh, was it
Letter
that awful Lord Chesterfield?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Really? Well done.
Yes. I expected the comments, but let's get the accuracy as well. Lord Chesterfield, writing to his natural son, Philip Dormer Stanhope, a letter of 5th of September, 1748, 2 marks.
Chesterfield was once being carried along the road by a chairman, and somebody said, "Look, there goes a peripatetic."
Good. I wish I'd thought of that before. Dennis Powell, when women kiss, it always reminds one of prize fighters shaking hands.
It's American.
It's American?
Yes.
It's American.
No.
I think Frank will get it.
It's not H.L. Mencken.
Yes, it is.
Oh, well, thank you,
But
Frank.
between them, they've got it. It's H.L. Mencken, who, well, anyway, it had a reputation in writing of being a misogynist. I don't think it was really true. And 2 marks. Well, then there's a quick round of what I think can be called double definitions. For 2 marks, what in a single word can be defined by both the definitions I shall give you in each question. Frank Muir, your alternatives are the portable sanctuary of Israelites and or a housing for the heel of a ship's mast.
The housing for the healing of a ship's mast. There's something in the sharp end of a boat called a tabernacle.
In fact, it's the portable sanctuary or tent, I think it was, of the Israelites carried by them through the desert when they were being led by Moses. And it is also, I think, in the Roman Catholic Church, the receptacle for the vessel which holds the host. And but it's also, curiously, this housing for the heel of a ship's mast. 2 marks. Anne Scott James, a sensation of elation and or a flight of 3 or more larks.
Oh, we've so often been asked what kind of a
Noun of a
bunch
sentence.
larks go.
4-syllable word, Anne.
Honestly? You know
Yes,
the answer
you're
to this
right,
one,
yeah.
do you? Do you know?
Exaltation.
Yes.
Oh, of course it is. Clever you are.
It's true. Exaltation means this sensation of being elated, but it is one of these nouns of congregation or assembly which were used by those who used to hunt or shoot or fish these creatures. And their name for a flight of larks was also an exaltation. Denis Norden, a large sherry glass and or a fore and aft rigged, generally 2-masted sailing vessel.
Well, yes, it's got to be a schooner.
Yes, schooner it is. 2 marks. Denis Powell, a medium-sized, speckle-breasted bird and or a fungoid growth on infants and horses.
Thrush.
Would you like to sort of expound a little?
A bird with a speckled breast. There are several, but a thrush is the one most familiar to us.
Yes.
And I do understand that I'm not very familiar with the complaint that horses certainly do suffer from the thrush.
Yes, and
Very badly.
Very bad.
what about human beings?
Well, I suppose they do, since you say so.
Well, they don't have it in the same place.
So,
I wouldn't know where.
have it so.
Yes, I think I was being a bit unfair there. It is the thrush, Old English thrishke, I think, and it can be with a horse, an inflammation of more or less the bottom end of the leg, the frog on the hoof. But with poor babies and small children, it's a disease which usually affects the mouth and throat. So the horse gets at one end and the baby gets at the other end. 2 marks. We come now to the last round, and to Frank and Denis's quotations, and the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Frank, your quotation is, "Any old iron."
Last April, I was up at St Andrews University watching the Kate Kennedy procession. And this was a procession of famous people who'd been connected with the university, and particularly Kate Kennedy, who was a woman, 16th century woman. And I thought this must be unique, that a woman should be connected with a university of that age. But it is not unique. I discovered the same thing is happening near me. I live in the poor quarter of Surrey, and I discovered that there was a University of Egham, founded by a woman. I was having tea at a sort of curiosity and junk shop in Egham, and he said, "Do have a piece of cake," and the door went ting-a-ling-a-ling, and he went to sell somebody a cracked plate, you know. And I picked up what I thought was this French pastry, this millefeuille, you know, those things with hundreds of layers of flaky pastry, and bit into it. It didn't taste very nice. I realised it wasn't a French pastry; it was an old book, and it was this little-known history of Egham University. It apparently was founded by this Lady Anne Hall, who was an Elizabethan, and she was an absolutely riveting person. I don't know why nobody's ever researched her before. She fell in love at the age of 14 with Sir Radcliffe Hall, and he was a bard. He was about 34, actually. She smuggled her lover in with a clergyman, and they were married secretly in the big house privy. This is an odd thing nowadays, an odd place to be married, but in those days, marriages of convenience were really quite... The young couple then settled in a substantial establishment at Egham, and she kept open house and was a sort of hostess there. And in fact, Shakespeare is believed to have stayed there, and she's believed to have influenced his work. She had an enormous, a vast bull terrier called Spot, who was incontinent. and after befouling the floor, when Shakespeare was there one long weekend, she opened the door and said, "Out, Spot, out, out," and, which is believed to have had an effect on Shakespeare and suggested... Spot, in fact, wandered across the old Roman bridge to a village on the north side and befouled that village so much that they renamed it Staines. From there, Lady Anne Hall, her husband then died. He was a gamester. He was always at gaming tables, and one day in his 38th year, he won for the first time and had an apoplexy and died. And then she went to Constantinople and Rome, and she travelled, and she wrote voluminous letters, as those women did back home. And these letters were exactly the sort of thing that Elizabeth and her ministers wanted, because they were gossipy letters, and she told where all the officers were, you know, the army, and how many ships were in the harbour. And she became the prime source of secret information to Queen Elizabeth I and her ministers. She was really the founder of the British Secret Service, although unwittingly. Eventually she returned home. She was an old woman. She was 142. And she came home, and she was at the dying Queen's bedside, and the dying Queen said, dear Annie, the doyenne of my Secret Service, and she turned to her ministers, dying, and said, "Let not poor Annie starve." So in that lovely sort of warm, simple logic of the Elizabethans, they took her out and beheaded her. So that was the end of Lady Anne Hall. But I'm going to revive this, and I'm going to start this Lady Anne Hall procession, as they've got at St Andrews, and we'll start where the university was, and we'll all be dressed in the various clothes of the people who are famous, you know, from that period, and then we'll all form up in front of the Literary Institute in Egham, and the picture of Annie will be held up, and this fantastic woman, I mean, doyen of the Secret Service, Queen Elizabeth, dear Annie, Lady Hall, and I will give the toast. And I'll say, with a chant, I will say, lift your glasses, the toast is, Annie Hall Doyen, Annie Hall Doyen, Annie, Annie, Annie Hall Doyen. She makes me think about you.
Well, a worse collection of historical nonsense I've never heard. So we go on to Denis Norden. And if you remember, his quotation was, what you lose on the swings, you gain on the roundabouts, which I think is an 19th century proverb. Denis.
Well, that philosophical maxim, or a slight variation of it, was the first thought that swam up into my mind after I'd finished reading a very comforting but entirely unsentimental book about 30s, 40s and early 50s dance bands called And the Bands Played On, written by Sid Collin. Now, why I call the book comforting was because it cured something that was worrying me. The whole world seems to be filling up with individuals who've never even heard of George Scott Wood and his Six Swingers. Or if they have, they think it's a topless trio. And what all this bred within me was a kind of nervous resentment, a resentment which, I freely admit this, began to express itself in tones of increasing peevishness. People used to dance holding each other. You didn't dance 2 paces away from a girl. You danced among her. What it all boiled down to was that my emotions had been influenced so much by the swing bands of my youth, I'd now become fixated. In a world of Frank Zappas, I was still grooving on Sidney Lipton. And my subconscious kept saying, one day it'll all return. The big bands will come back. But, you see, it was exactly that delusion for which Sid Collins' book managed a cure, because what he states very convincingly is that they won't. Their time has gone. That era is past. The one thing that you can't do with the snows of yesteryear is refreeze. However, what Sid Collins is careful to point out is that the particular emotional impulse that those swing bands catered to, that is not being mollified by pop groups. So, knowing that nature abhors a vacuum, what is filling that particular gap? Well, I think I can tell you. Soft porn. Yes, smut. That same steamy kind of titillation that my age group used to get from Alice Faye's lower lip, or a really entwined last waltz, that now comes inside paper covers. You see, what's happened is they've brought in Henry Miller to fill the gap that was left by Glenn. So, for that portion of the population who are anywhere around my age bracket, in other words, roughly halfway between adolescence and obsolescence, all is not lost. Before you draw your old age pension, you can still satisfy your middle age penchant. Because you see, although the big BANDS are not coming back, the big BANNEDS are coming in. Or put it another way, what you lose on the swing, you gaze on the randy bits.
Ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Frank Muir wins the story, and he and Dilys Powell win this week's contest.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore, and the programme was produced by Tony Shrine. My Word. A panel game devised by Tony Shrine and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
And we go straight into the first round, which tests their respective vocabularies. For 2 marks, what's the meaning of the following words? Beginning with Denis Norden. Denis, yours is an imbroglio. I-M-B-R-O-G-L-I-O, imbroglio.
Well, it sounds like it's Italian for umbrella, doesn't it? It's a kind of, what I understand it to be, a kind of confused but rather complex foul-up.
Yes.
If you want an example, get on to the bloke who does my VAT.
That's a very good definition, yes. A confused mess or state of entanglement, complicated situation. In music, there's a particular way of writing and a sort of ordered confusion, which is also called imbroglio. 2 marks. Now, Dilys Powell. Denis, a simulacrum. S-I-M-U-L-A-C-R-U-M, simulacrum.
Simulacrum. Well, it's a kind of something which is similar.
Yeah?
My mind is an ordered confusion. I'm bound to say that I think it's a kind of imitation, something which looks like something which is quite serious, but is not itself quite the same.
That's right. A semblance of, a specious imitation of something or someone, or an image or representation, with an idea of deception about it as well, like the sort of Wraith Helen who was conjured up in the Odyssey. 2 marks. All right, Frank Muir, a different one. A parbuckle, P-A-R-B-U-C-K-L-E.
Well, in the 17th century, the father at a wedding took a far more important part in the ceremony than he does now. And in his clothes and everything, and in what he wore on his shoes, is not the answer. Because I think I know this. I think it's what I would have called a Spanish windlass.
Yes? Getting now.
And a Spanish windlass was a device invented by presumably a Spaniard, whereby if you wanted to move a very, very, very heavy barrel, if you anchored a rope and passed both ends round the barrel, and then pulled both ends, it's really quite easy to shift it. That's the Spanish windlass.
And it's also a power buckle, well done. You can see draymen sometimes, brewers' draymen, putting one of these enormous barrels down a ramp into the bowels of the pub where they're going to be drunk later. 2 marks. And Scott James, a nexus, N-E-X-U-S.
Well, I had a birthday not so long ago. And when I suggested to my husband that the customary retired bunch of flowers bought on the way home would not really meet the occasion, he said, well, I've got a cash nexus at the moment, which is the only way in which I can think nexus is actually used in English, but it means a sort of tie-up, a knot.
A link, that's right. A strand that unifies, yes. It's a Latin word that means to bind or bind together. 2 marks, well done.
Necklace.
Well, a necklace is a nexus, but... it's
I'm just sort of pondering, you know.
Yes, it is.
You know, there's a flower store just near us which stays open in the street, outdoor one, frightfully late, about 8 o'clock. And there's a queue of men, entirely men, on their way home, because they're either late for dinner or something. I call it the Guilty Men flower store. It does frightfully well.
Something for the little woman. Yes. Well, before we go on to the next round, here are the quotations you were given for the last round of all. And Denis, yours is, Hail to the blithe spirit, bird thou never wert. And yours, Frank, is more in sorrow than in anger. This is a round of second lines. 2 marks. I want to know what is the first opening line before the one that I'm going to quote, and they're all quotations from Shakespeare. Denis Norden, pluck from the memory a rooted sorrow.
That's Macbeth.
Yes?
That's when the doctor tells Macbeth about Lady Macbeth not being able to sleep. Her fancies will not let her rest.
Yes?
And Macbeth says, then cure her of it, canst thou not minister to a mind diseased?
Absolutely right.
Yeah?
Yes, and then pluck from the memory.
Pluck from the memory.
Well done. Macbeth, Act 5, Scene 3, 2 marks. Dilys Powell, the valiant never taste of death but once.
A coward dies many times before his death.
Yes, that's good enough. Do you remember the play? Not essential.
No, I don't.
Julius Caesar, talking about himself being boastful. When beggars die, there are no comets seen. The heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes. Now, Frank Muir, thaw and resolve itself into a dew.
Oh, thank you. It's from Hamlet.
Yes.
And it's the sort of Weight Watchers.
Yes.
Oh, that this tutu's solid flesh would melt.
2 marks. And Scott James. And tell sad stories of the death of kings.
I'd let us here sit down upon the ground and tell sad stories of the deaths of kings, which must be Richard II.
Well done.
Oh.
Yeah. Richard II defeated and going to prison. For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. 2 marks. That brings us on to a round of differences. For 2 marks, what's the precise difference in meaning between these sets of 2 words? Denis Norden, jejune, J-E-J-U-N-E, and jejunum, J-E-J-U-N-U-M. I don't know how to pronounce the Latin one.
No, you never said it out loud, have you?
No, I haven't.
Jejunum. Jejune, it means sort of feeble, tasteless, insipid, puerile.
Yes, all of those. Yep.
Jejunum, I've never heard ever.
Apparently, the jejunum is the second part of the small intestine between the duodenum and the ileum.
Oh, good. A sort of semicolon.
Semicolon, yeah. And now, Dilys Powell, yours is quite different. Jurisdiction and jurisprudence.
Jurisdiction, jurisprudence. Well, one means what you say, and the other means your wisdom in it.
Yes.
Jurisdiction is a judgment.
Yeah, yes, it can be a judgment.
Well,
Not very often.
If it can be, don't let's go any further.
No.
A jurisprudence is the kind of law, the kind of system of law which produces jurisdictions.
Yes, that'll do. I think we'd better do a little cleaning up. I'll give you 2 marks. Jurisdiction is the administration of justice, or its exercise, and it's the extent of judicial authority. It might be the actual geographical cover of a particular court. Jurisprudence, knowledge of, skill in law, or the science which deals with human laws generally. 2 marks. Frank Muir, talent and genius.
The word talent comes from the biblical thing of a talent.
Hiding of talents, yeah.
Is a kind of monetary thing. It's a sum of money or something which you can acquire, but which is a quality. And genius is a thing which is born in you. From genie, thingamy. That's what the word means. But they meant the same. And we still say he has a genius for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time,
yes.
Don't we? Which means he has an aptitude for
yes,
it.
But
genius is that talent which is exalted into something which is much, much better than anybody else in the same field.
That's right. Talent is narrow. It's a special aptitude or faculty, or can be a natural gift. Genius is a much higher level altogether. In modern parlance, can summit intellectual or creative power, and usually inventive capacity as well. It's very difficult, as Frank says, but certainly worth his 2 marks.
I think it was Peter de Vries, but I'm not sure. But it was an American writer who said that Thomas Wolfe was a genius without talent.
Yeah.
It was said about Beethoven, in fact. It was said about Beethoven that he was a genius without talent, because he could do superb things superbly, but he couldn't do ordinary things well.
Yeah, it's like Einstein not being able to repair a fuse.
Yes. Oh, it's now Anne Scott James's turn. Piquancy and pungency.
Well, piquancy has a sort of... well, we're assuming that they're both used of flavours, things to eat, are we not? Piquancy has a sharpness about it.
Yes.
And pungency has... a sort of spiciness about it.
Yes.
So you have a piquant sauce and a pungent curry.
Yes.
Pungent has a smell too, I think.
I think that too, absolutely. There is a piquant sauce, and it pleasantly stimulates you, and it means, it's a French word meaning to prick, it pricks the senses. Pungent is altogether sort of thicker,
Heavier
isn't it?
stuff,
Heavier
isn't
and
it?
thicker,
Yes.
which stimulates the mind or the senses or whatever it is, and it tends to be disagreeable in the way that piquant doesn't, though not always. 2 marks. Now a round of literary children. For 2 marks, what's the surname of the children whose Christian names I'm going to give, and in what work of literature do they appear? Denis Norden, John and Betty.
Good Lord, I don't know. John and Betty. It sounds...
Educational reading books, I think.
That's first thought occurred to me. It's those kind of first primers of reading, where it says, you know, John has a cat, Betty kicks the cat. You know.
John pulls Betty's hair.
Yeah.
And
It's,
thumps her in the
it's
eye.
monosyllable type reading, although Betty isn't.
The father had a rather unusual Christian name. It was Lemuel.
Gulliver?
Yeah.
Well, I accept your help, Jack, but I still can't remember it, really.
Never mind, 1.5. John and Betty were the
Charity, that was.
2 children whom Gulliver was always sailing away from, though he occasionally came home to in Gulliver's Travels. Dilys Powell, Wendy, John and Michael.
It's the Barry play. What's it called? Peter Pan.
Yes, it wasn't only a play, but that's good enough. 2 marks. The book as well, before it was a play. Frank Muir, Jane, Elizabeth, Catherine, Mary and Lydia.
Weren't John Peel's hounds?
No, it's much more literary than that.
Oh.
It's It's Jane Austen.
Jane Austen. In Pride and Prejudice. Thank you very much, audience. They were the 5 daughters of Mr. Bennet, weren't they?
The 5 Bennet daughters in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice.
Dennis and I wrote a television show for Jimmy Edwards in which it was sort of pastiche of this Pride and Prejudice. And it started with the 5 daughters all tatting away for interminably, and the audience got very restive. And eventually the incomparable June Whitfield put down her needlework and said the line, "6 months gone and no word from Captain Fanshawe." To show how these things change, that in those days the BBC wouldn't allow that. And they insisted that poor June said, "6 months gone and no word from Captain Fanshawe."
Well, I think Frank gets his 2 marks for his coda. And Scott James. James, Frank, Emma, Fanny, Kate, Louisa, and Martha.
It's going to take me half an hour writing these down.
Well, the father was, he wasn't on the night shift.
Go on, say it all over again.
James, Frank, Emma, Fanny, Kate, Louisa, and Martha.
Are they all one family?
Yes.
Well, it can't be Jane Austen because we wouldn't have it had twice in one round, would we?
No.
Must be a Victorian family at that size.
Yes, that's right.
It's not Dickens, is it?
No, you're have the other one. Try the other one instead.
Not Thackeray.
Yes.
Really now? I don't think I'm going to know. The Rose and the Ring? No, it can't be that. Jane.
No. Chumcook.
It isn't Vanity Fair.
That is, it's Vanity Fair.
It can't be. No, but I can't see what family it would be.
A chap called Norden was in it too.
Oh, Rawdon
it's
Crawley.
a funny question then,
Yes.
I think 1.5. Fair amount of help was given there.
Yes, I think that was kind.
These are the children, Crawley family, Vanity Fair, Thackeray. We come now to the last round, and to Dennis and Frank's quotations, and the marks will be given on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Dennis's quotation was, "Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert, Shelley, ode to a skylark." Dennis.
Gather round me, hearties, and I'll spin you a yarn of the sailing ship days, when I was serving as a cabin boy aboard the good ship Bounty, bound for the Coconut Isles. A proud, beautiful foremaster she were when she were first commissioned, with the figurehead of an undressed lady sticking out in front, all ship-shape and Bristol fashion. But by the time I came to serve on her, she turned into a right hell ship. All the mainsails were tattered, all the forecastles were worm-eaten, and even the lifebelts had big holes in the middle. But worst of all were her captain, Captain Bligh, a great towering giant of a man, so evil-hearted that he wore a big black beard so he could make faces at people without them seeing what he was doing. A right slave driver he were, with a voice that could warp a 9-inch teak plank, and the cruelest notions of seafaring in the British Navy. To make the ship go faster, he used to line the whole crew up on the poop deck and make them blow on the sail. But it weren't just the exhaustion and the continual feeling of being out of breath. That weren't what started the murmuring. By the 10th week out, we were all half faint from hunger, because the only food that Bligh doled out was either salt pork or ship's biscuit, both of them riddled with the weevil. Most of us chose the ship's biscuit. Why did we choose the ship's biscuit, Mr. Muir?
It'd be the lesser of the 2 weevils.
Right. But by the 19th week out, even the ship's biscuit had run out, and we were still only 3 miles past Littlehampton. And that were when Fletcher Christian, the first mate, he came to me and he started talking mutiny. "Will you come aft with me, lad?" he said. "Come where?" I said. Because I was by now so dropping with fatigue, I didn't know my aft from my forward, you see. He said, "The captain's quarters. I'll get Bligh with a little help from my friend." Well, he were a strange one, that Fletcher Christian, a cut above the rest of us. You could tell he were an educated man by the way he blew his nose in a handkerchief. And what he'd got against Bligh, you see, that was not the keel-haulings or the masthead lashings or making us throw a bosun over the rail when he really meant to say a basin. No, what Fletcher hated Bligh for was for the way he treated his parrot. See, there was this parrot, that Bligh had, but being such an ignorant man, he didn't even realise it were a parrot. He were under the impression it was one of them seabirds called Albert Ross. So on account of that, he always referred to the parrot as Bert. And that was what really got up Fletcher Christian's nose, you see, because being all that educated, not only could he recognise a parrot when he saw one, he also happened to know that this one were a female. See, so Bligh calling her Bert, well, it were like insulting womanhood, as it were. You know what I mean? Because your educated classes, you see, they deny themselves that pleasure. So anyway, I says, "Yes, I'm with you, Mr. Christian." And off we went to the ship's galley for some belaying pins and marlin spike, because the cook had been using them to try and tenderize the weevils that Mr. Muir was so prompt with. And before you could say a vast behind, there were old Captain Bligh drifting astern, shaking his fist at us. "Cast me adrift in an open boat," he was saying, "nearly 2,000 yards from the nearest land, without even the company of my Albert Ross." "It's not an albatross," old Fletch shouts back. And turning to the bird, he said, "Hail to thee, Bligh's parrot. Bert thou never wert."
I never knew Denis would turn himself into such a dangerous nautical character. But we'll go on now to Frank and his story. The line being "more in sorrow than in anger" comes from Hamlet. Frank.
This lady rang me only this morning with such a nice voice. And she said she was doing a survey for her magazine, her glossy magazine. I can't give you the name of the magazine, which wouldn't be seemly on this programme. But it was very flattering to be asked. It's nice to be still in vogue. And they're doing a survey, apparently, on sort of embarrassing experiences and where they happen in the home or in the school or in the country or in towns. And she asked me about my embarrassing experience. Now, I've got to get a bit of a move on, actually, because the producer says that my stories are always overlong, so I'm going to whiz through this terribly quickly. The first embarrassing experience I remember was at home in Surrey. I got my ear caught in an egg beater. My wife had asked me to buy an egg beater, and I went into the local supermarket in Egham, and I twirled it to try it, and there was a ting, 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 as though some of the metal was hitting bits of the other metal. So in order to determine which tine was hitting the sort of untwirly part, I put it closer and closer to my ear, and it went ting, 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 quick. My ear was fast lodged, and so the pain is awful in the lobe of the ear. You know, it's not deathly. You won't die from it. So I covered it over with a hanky and ran towards Thieker's, the ironmonger's, in order, because they got machinery there, you know, and vices and things, and they could separate the thing from it. And as I was running towards Theka's, which was really quite a short distance, there was pounding behind me, and the supermarket manager was saying, "Excuse me, sir, I don't believe you paid for that." and then, just that moment, the new vicar appeared on the pavement, and because I started this dramatic society, and we changed vicars in Thorpe. This was years ago. And they said, well, you must really get on good terms with the new vicar to get these new sort of forward-thinking plays like Blythe Spirit and things on, you know. And it's most essential that I present a calm, dignified, rather conservative appearance. And there was I with my handkerchief covering this egg beater. And there was the vicar, and he said, "Mr. Muir, I believe." And he said, "What are you up to now?" I said, "I'm going to the ironmonger's to get a egg beater removed from my ear, after which I'm going to prison." The other, recollecting these embarrassing experiences, was over 30 years ago when I was on television at Alexander Palace, and in a program called New to You, which was an afternoon program viewed by Queen Mary for some curious reason. And about 200 television dealers. But anyway, it went out at the time. And makeup with them was rather fierce. Now it's much better. But in those days, it was a kind of full pier-end makeup. And one had rouge over the cheeks and carmine dots in the eyes and blue shadows over the eyelids. And the whole thing was a bit grotesque. But anyway, I did the programme, and I had a party afterwards in Essex, a sort of drinkies party. I arranged to meet my wife there in Thaden Boys. Do you know Thaden Boys? Lovely place in Essex, just the other side of Epping. And I got lost, and I overshot. And I arrived at a place called Ongar. And I'd forgotten that I'd still got my makeup on. And there was a police constable standing there. And I wound the window down and said, "Excuse me, officer, but I'm looking for Thaden Boys." I remember his reply to this day. He said, "You won't find any round here ducky." But in reply to the lady about embarrassing experiences and where they happen, I think for me they happen in the country. And if one wants to pin it down, I would say, quoting from Hamlet, on the whole, more in Surrey than in Ongar.
By your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the story, but Dilys Powell and Frank Muir win this week's contest.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore, and the programme was produced by Tony Shrine. My Word. A panel game devised by Tony Shrine and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
And we go straight into the first round, which tests their respective vocabularies. For 2 marks, what's the meaning of the following words? Frank Muir, your word is ambivalence.
Oh, it's one of those doubles, isn't it?
Yes.
Like ambidextrous. I'm dexterous in both ams. I suppose Hamlet was Mr. Ambivalence, wasn't it?
Supremely so.
It means the inability to make up your mind, or the uncertainty which of two opposing courses of action or theories you should hew to.
If I could give you 2.5, I would, but I'll give you 2. Coexisting in one person, opposite or conflicting emotional attitudes towards something, whether it's a person or an object. Absolutely right. And Anne Scott James, it's your turn now. Vestigial.
Well, vestigium means literally a footstep.
Yes.
So this
Does
means...
it?
Yes.
Well, explain.
I'm about
Just leave
to
it
explain.
hanging
I
there.
haven't finished my word.
Footprint, isn't it?
So it means leaving traces.
Yes.
Yeah.
2 marks. A mark, trace, visible sign of something which has almost disappeared, and in a biological sense, I'm told, a reduced and functionless structure which is surviving in a degenerate condition. And I'm told again, I'm probably dead wrong, and that's what happens to your vermiform appendix. 2 marks.
That's it.
Denis Norden, your word is paranoid.
The best use I ever heard of that word was, I'm trying to think where it was. I think it was a taxi driver. He was talking about his son's wedding. He said we got a lot of photographs because one of my cousins has got one of them paranoid cameras. Which actually I've got. Any cheap camera is a paranoid. It's one of those words that's been imported from psychiatry,
yes.
And I don't know what its actual strict medical meaning is, but I know it's mainly used wrongly in the sense, they say he's absolutely paranoid about paper clips,
yes.
which I think means he gets vaguely irritated if you leave paper clips lying around. But I think it means something of it's some kind of neurosis or maybe psychosis, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the most normal is those who imagine that they're being persecuted by other people. They can also suffer from delusions of grandeur or excessive pride. That's the sort of main category of paranoids. Dilys Powell, yours is a word I've only just learned how to pronounce. Cicerone, or some people call Cicerone, and it's spelt Cicerone, and I plump for Cicerone.
Well, I wouldn't have known how to pronounce it. I thought it meant a kind of gallant attendant.
Yes,
He's got to do more than express gallantry towards you. There, almost any of your attendants will do that, Dylan.
He has to guide you around.
That's what I wanted. The main function of the Cicerone was to show the antiquities or the curiosities of some ancient city to strangers, and therefore he became a guide, and the whole thing comes from that fairly dubious character, Cicero, Roman orator. Before we go on to the next round, here are the quotations you were given for the last round of all. And Frank, yours is a rag and a bone and a hank of hair, and yours, Denis, we who are about to die salute thee. Well, now, a round about something in common, that is, for 2 marks, what do the following words, names, or phrases have in common with each other? Frank Muir, yours is a pretty odd lot. Take all, eye spot, yellow slime, and loose smut.
There's some frightful,
Not 20
unspeakable diseases.
That's right,
aren't
not
there?
20 yards from your front door.
What? They're either vegetable or animal diseases. Eye spot.
Stick to the first.
Well, they're frightful and unspeakable and very ugly names for diseases which affect vegetable matter.
That's right. All I want. Diseases of farm crops. Now to Anne Scott James. Your 4 and are ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision.
I think they all come in Alice in Wonderland.
That's right. Yeah. And what were the branches of or alleged to be.
Dennis, can you go
Addition.
further into this?
Yes.
Isn't it addition, subtraction,
Agrification
multiplication,
Multiplication.
and derision.
division?
Yes, that's right.
Oh, goody.
Absolutely right. These are the different branches of arithmetic studied by the mock turtle in Alice in Wonderland. 2 marks. Well done. Denis Norden's turn. Cakes and ale, dear Brutus, cry havoc, and sad Cyprus. Have they in common?
They're all book titles.
That's right. And
Cakes and Ale, Dear Brutus, Cry Havoc. What was the last one?
sad Cyprus.
That's an Agatha Christie, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
They all have that in common. They have a bit more in common than that.
Oh, no, they're all taken from Shakespearean quotations.
Absolutely
Their
right.
titles all come from Shakespearean quotation.
2 marks straight away. That's absolutely fine. Book titles lifted from Shakespeare: Somerset Maugham, J.M. Barrie, Beverley Nichols, Agatha Christie. The first and the last come from Twelfth Night. The second and the third come from Julius Caesar. Dilys Powell, will you connect, please? It all sounds terribly vulgar. Oof, O-O-F, Mazuma, M-A-Z-U-M-A, Rhino, R-H-I-N-O, and Spondulix, S-P-O-N-D-U-L-I-C-K-S. I want a connection between the 4.
Yes, they all mean money.
I can't beat that girl. There are different slang terms for money. I think money in the form of cash normally, or cash or notes, and I won't tell you where they come from because only in 2 cases do I actually know. Well, now we have a round of potted and peripatetic poetry because for 2 marks I want members of the teams to recite the complete quatrain of poetry from which we've extracted the following 4 words only. 1 word for each line of the quatrain, and that's the clue word to the line in each case.
Sounds fun.
Well, we begin with Frank. You see whether he finds it so. Frank, your 4 words are star, clear, moaning, and sea, S-E-A.
The star was clear above a moaning sea.
You've only got 2 lines, huh?
Yes.
Or 1.
It's Golden Treasury Tennyson.
Yes?
And it's an allegorical poem of dying,
That's right.
of crossing the river Styx. And it sounds a bit like departing briskly from the Broadstairs Yacht Club bar, having ordered a round of drinks and not paid for it. Sunset and a morning cloud, and a brisk call for me, and may there be no moaning at the bar as I put out to sea.
2 marks. And that brings me on to Anne Scott James. And your 4 words are prison, iron, I-R-O-N, innocent, and hermitage.
Haven't the slightest clue.
Oh, prison and iron.
Yes, sure.
They do not make.
No.
Iron bars do not a prison. No, it's not it, is it?
Stone walls.
Stone walls do not a prison make. I don't think it comes from that.
It does.
No, iron bars a cage.
That'll do.
And then the others are coming within the next 2 lines.
Oh,
So
yes,
that's
an
it, yeah.
innocent I am within my hermitage. Do we think it's Browning?
No, you
No,
don't.
it's,
What do you think it
it's to the Castron going to the war. It's lovely.
Lovely, that's absolutely right. Between you, you've got really a slightly altered version, so I better give the right one. You've got the gist of it, all right. Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage. Minds innocent and quiet, take that for a hermitage. Lovelace to Lucasta, going beyond the seas. I think you creep home to your 2 marks, just. Now Denis Norden's turn. Denis, froth, stone, trouble, courage.
The only quotation I know that contains froth is the grapes of froth. Froth?
Could be ginger beer.
Stone.
Trouble. Ginger beer.
Trouble.
Stone beer, yes.
Yes.
Stone ginger.
1 minute. I'll whip you. I'll whip you up one. Through drinking far too much of froth, I put on half a stone. I wish I took the trouble and courage to leave the stuff alone.
One mark for show effrontery. The quotation comes from an otherwise fairly obscure poet, Mr. Adam Gordon. Life is mostly froth and bubble. Two things stand like stone: kindness in another's trouble, courage in your own. Dilys Powell, strife, sober, veil, V-A-L-E, and tenor, D-E-N-O-R, it could be O-U-R to help you.
Strife.
Sober, veil, tenor.
Yes, along the sort of cool, sequestered veil of life,
That's
they
right.
held their something tenor of their way.
Yes, so let's have the first two lines.
Far from the madding, no.
Yes, that's right.
Madding crowd.
Crowds. Yes,
Ignoble
strife.
yes, that's right.
Ignoble strife.
Strife.
With
Yeah.
Something that is sober, the next one.
That's right.
They,
Well, courage has nothing to do with
no,
it.
Well, never mind. Get on to the third line, which you've got in your head already.
Yes. Along the cool sequestered veil of life, they held something tenor
Even
of their way.
tenor.
Even tenor.
It isn't,
of
but
their
it's near
way.
enough.
Well,
Yeah.
Even tenor.
Well,
It's Gray's elegy.
Gray's elegy, yes. Far from the madding crowd's ignoble strife, their sober wishes never learned to stray. Along the cool sequestered veil of life, they kept the noiseless tenor of their way.
Oh, would that so many tenors were noiseless.
And now we come to the last round, and Frank and Denis's quotations, and the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Frank, your quotation was a rag and a bone and a hank of hair. It comes from a poem of Kipling's, The Vampire.
I thought I wouldn't do a story tonight, but I'd sort of keep you in touch with the state of play with the animals in our household, because those listeners who've been bored to sobs over the last 22 years with the various tales will be anxious to know about the new cat. Well, the kitten actually ceased to be a kitten today because he's Monticello and he's a blue Burmese kitten. And today he's become of age, he's 1, and now he can say, "I am a cat." It's his poor mitzvah. And I suppose the first thing was when he was really quite young, and he was sitting on the toaster, which is warm, at breakfast time, and I was reading one of the larger papers, not one of the tabloids, on my knees, and he leapt upon it, not understanding that a paper is not firm. And he leapt on it, and of course went straight through it, and descended upon the Afghan. Now, when the kitten is confronted with the Afghan, he turns ugly. The kitten, all the hairs on his body, he's able to turn at right angles to his skin and become a flue brush. And he adopts an ugly face and goes... And the dogs quail and go away. But suddenly the kitten descending upon the dog was too much for the dog. He gave a loud bark, whereupon the kitten leapt up onto the fridge, jumped onto the draining board, skidded, and ploughed through a whole rack of the whole of our 6 decent dinner plates. You know, a kitten's is really quite light, but with the impetus of the actual velocity of a kitten, its weight plus its speed demolished a rack of dinner plates. And the other event in his short life was a Sunday morning, and there was a girl from our village, a girl called Claire Bowen, who came in to fetch something for the village fete. Nice girl, 16, very attractive, and I gave her the bit, you know, my left shoe or something, as a contribution to the jumble sale. And the kitten had worked around the back of her woolen dress. And the funny thing about crochet work, isn't it, that if a kitten can get a claw into the hem and then run like steam towards the shrubbery, and there was suddenly this Claire Bowen was in her underwear. And no dress. And she, poor girl, was very upset and ran down the drive, and I scooped up as much wool as I could and pursued her through the village, you know, because I thought that her mother could knit it up again. And I could say, "Stop, Claire, we can get this together again." You know, and church was coming out, and I didn't mind resigning from the parish council because it's time for a younger man to take over anyway. And the third occasion was when Monticello started climbing. He was terribly good at going up, but didn't know how to come down. And he was climbing up the cherry tree, and he got really quite near the top. And I thought, oh, Lord. So I went and stationed myself under him, and he climbed down by the simple kitten-like thing of turning round and sort of running down instead of up. Because he ran down at the rate of 72 feet per sec acceleration, hit a crutch, was stunned, and I caught him, and he clung to me, and one of his claws went into the lobe of my ear, and he sort of dangled there. And my ear was really quite painful and damaged, and I detached him. And I remember that when you get flesh cut, you must press it together. So I rushed in and got the pastry tongs and put that to my ear and wrapped a stout rubber band around the two sides. And I wore that for a fortnight, and looking rather like a rather elderly lead singer of a punk rock group. But the ear did heal, except there's a bit missing. So, but he doesn't notice. You know. So really, if you're contemplating kittens, don't worry, because in my experience, only 3 bad things have happened. You know, rather like Kipling's definition of a woman. Just 3 things. In regard to the cat, they were a rack and a Bowen and a hunk of ear.
I should add that Frank's kitten is named after the very charming Corsican village where he has a tower. And now on to Denis Norden and his quotation, "We who are about to die salute thee."
The point about Gerald and Dolly is that they're such nice people, and he's so obviously, utterly devoted to her that you just don't like to turn him down when he invites you to a dinner party, even though Dolly is so badly afflicted with this very rare physiological disability. She was born without any taste buds. Now, I hasten to point out that this doesn't in any way distress her. It's just a bit rough on anybody she cooks for. Because, you see, it's not just the complete inability to discriminate between tastes, so that she'll taste absolutely nothing odd at all about putting, for example, marmalade on sardines, because she hasn't got any equipment to taste what it tastes like, you see. But what is more important is that she's so completely desensitized that she's quite unaware, she has no equipment for sympathizing with the most basic rules of food preparation. Like, I remember when she and Gerald were first married, he once came home and she said to him, "Darling, I found the most marvellous recipe for lobster thermidor, but because lobsters are so expensive, I made it with mincemeat." and another time she greeted him with you know, when they'd just been married, she said, "Guess what I've been doing all the afternoon? I've been frying you a cake." And now, because Gerald, who has, as I've said, he absolutely adores her, because he doesn't want to make her feel in any way inadequate, he's learnt to live with her disability by a combination of eating out a lot and bulk buying indigestion tablets. But what has complicated life for him is that because Dolly also loves people, she insists on giving fairly frequent dinner parties. Now, the way that Gerald has learned to cope with this is simply by being completely honest with his friends. What he does is he rings you up and he says, "Listen, mate, I'm calling for volunteers for one of Dolly's meals." Then, when you're there, as you're, you know, round about on the second sherry or something, his head will come round the door from the kitchen and say, "I'm afraid I've got very bad news. Dinner is served." Or, you know, sometimes he'll say, "Dinner's ready, folks. Come and guess it." However, it isn't actually quite the ordeal that it might be, because what Gerald's also done is rather good ploy. He's installed a secret button under his dining room chair. That way, as soon as Dolly serves up the main course, by pressing the button with his foot, he makes the front door ring. The bell on the front door ring. You see? And as soon as she's left the room to answer the bell, you all whip out one of the little plastic bags that he gives you as you come in, as he takes your coat, and you empty what looks to be the diciest item on the plate into the bag, and you put it in your hip pocket. You see, so because of that, actually, there's hardly anybody in the neighbourhood now who doesn't possess some kind of souvenir of one of Dolly and Gerald dinner party. In our house, there's a hamburger which we use to this day sometimes to scour the saucepan. In our spare room, there's a couple of her dumplings which make very good bookends. And however, at this particular party where that quotation came into play, we were all rather hoping that it would be somewhat more of a normal evening, because Gerald whispered to us as we came in that he'd actually managed to persuade Dolly that the way that today's hostess can spend more time with her guests is by making use of these restaurants that you ring up and they send the meals round to you, dish by dish, you see. We were a little bit taken aback rather than taken away when Dolly entered the dining room with a great steaming tureen and said, "Because it's such a cold night, I thought I'd make us all a nice hot tomato soup before we tuck into all that takeaway stuff." You see, and I saw Gerald wince visibly, and he said, "How did you make it, darling?" And she said, "Well, I didn't actually make it. I remember what you told me about the hostess and so on. And I simply heated up one of those tin tomato soups." You see, everybody's heart, all the hearts around the table which had sunk, promptly rose again until we all took our first mouthful. And we realised what she'd done. She'd used a tin of condensed soup without adding water. Now, I don't know if you've ever drunk hot tomato soup that way. Not only is it so sharp to the taste that your tongue comes out in like hives, but it has the consistency of fresh cement. But Gerald wasted no time. There's an imperceptible movement of his foot under the table. Brrr, front door bell rang. Out goes Dolly. The moment she left to answer it, we all did our customary whipping out of the plastic bag, and we realised that wouldn't work tonight. No one can spend a whole social evening with a hip pocket full of hot tomato soup. But Gerald actually was marvellous. He was absolutely equal to the occasion. He grabbed the water jug and he, in a flash, he whipped round the whole of the table and filled up everybody's tumbler, and he said, "Thin it down with this." And it was at that moment, as we realised that we were in for yet another evening of culinary disaster, it was that moment that the same quotation went through all our minds. With tumblers of water poised, we gazed at this porridge-like soup, and we thought, "We who are about to sigh, dilute thee."
I doubt if I shall ever dine out again. And by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the story, but the other team, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, win the entire contest this week.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore, and the programme was produced by Tony Schrein. My Word. Panel game devised by Tony Schrein and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
And we go straight into the first round, which tests their vocabulary, and for 2 marks, can you tell me the meaning of the following words? We begin with Denis Norden this week. Denis, yours is synoptic.
Synoptic. Synoptic sounds like the crime of giving eye lotion to a peeping Tom.
What the butler saw.
Yeah. But I believe it means the gathering together of various points of view in order to provide what is now called a global view of a subject.
That'll do very well. It means furnishing a general view of what the particular subject happens to be, or a combined opinion about something. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, a paradigm.
Well, that tests my vocabulary, all right. Paradigm. It's kind of model.
Yeah.
Is it a kind of model?
Yes, go on to
Kind
that.
of model.
Yes, but that might be Diana Dawes or anything you can think of.
It's a literary model. It's a literary.
That's what I wanted. Yes, I think you get there. It's a pattern or example, particularly an example of the inflection of a word grammatically, and it can sometimes be a model that you're trying to attain to, something which is almost impossibly beyond your reach. Frank Muir, yours is much harder. Yours is synecdoche.
It's a figure of speech.
Yes?
Sign.
Put it together.
Synthesis.
You're getting there.
You're
getting there.
The adding together of elements. Synecdoche.
I'll give you an example, Frank, in case you can sort of spot the word which matters here. If you were a bit poetic and saying you'd seen Sir Richard Grenville and a fleet of 50 sail, that would be a synecdoche.
January, when they have to get rid of all the goods in the shops.
S-A-I-L. Sorry.
It's a collective noun.
It's a collective noun. It's from the Greek, I suspect.
Yes.
Well, come on.
Come on. What
Yes,
happened?
but...
Collective, is that so far? It's a collective literary noun.
No, I don't think you get it.
No, we're sort of not even warm. We're deep frozen.
You're right in the sense that it is a figure in grammar or rhetoric, but it's putting the part for the whole, or the part, or the other way around, the whole for the part. So a fleet of 50 sail, unless we're being terribly stupid, means a fleet of 50 ships, because the sails don't sail along by themselves, and that's synecdoche. Now, you've got it as a figure of speech, so I'm going to give you a rather generous one out.
What a great...
All right, we go on to Anne Scott James. And your word is ethnic, E-T-H-N-I-C.
Oh, well...
You're all getting grown, you could have done this. Well, a definition means it's to do with tribe or race or nation. Race,
Okay.
really. But it's come to me in a modern fashion term, which you go back to nature.
It's come to mean embroidered at the bodice.
Stuff with beads galore, yeah.
All right, I think you'll get there. 2 marks. Before we go on to the next round, here are the quotations you were given for the last round of all. And Denis Norden, yours is east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. And Frank, yours is the miner's dream of home.
I saw the old homestead and faces.
Keep it there, last round, Frank. But now we go on to a round of odd men out. For 2 marks, can you identify from the following groups of words the word or name that doesn't, in its meaning or nature, conform to the others? Denis Norden, your lot is this: carboy, C-A-R-B-O-Y, carboy, punnet, demijohn, tantalus, and samovar.
Well, they're all containers for some kind of liquid, except punnet, which is a container, as far as I know, it's either a container for strawberries when you buy them off a barrow, or else they're in those drawing room comedies. In the first act, actually, as the curtain went up, the lady came through the French windows carrying a punnet and saying, "Has the young master called?"
As a collective term, may I suggest a punnet of my word stories?
They leak, I think. I mean, Dennis has got the main point. All the rest contain, or are supposed to contain, liquids, whereas if you poured liquid into a punnet, which is constructed of basket work or lath, it wouldn't stay in it at all. 2 marks well earned by Dennis. Dennis Powell, these are yours. Peaberry, P-E-A, peaberry. Longberry Harrar, H-A-R-R-A-R. Orizaba, O-R-I-Z-A-B-A. Oolong, O-O-L-O-N-G, Oolong, and San Jose, J-O-S-E, San Jose.
Well, you just had oolong, is that?
Yes, now you won't guess that one.
I haven't the faintest idea why, but it's the one out, isn't
Yes.
it?
You don't have to say why, Dilys.
I don't have to say why.
Man didn't ask you why.
No. So oolong is the word out. Yes.
I think technically that's Dilys wins on having got oolong.
All right.
Well, try lapsang and things like that.
Oh, that's kind of tea, yes. And the others are not tea.
That's right.
No. The others aren't tea.
The most expensive drink these days, the others are.
It's all coffee.
Somebody new in the audience.
Yes.
I think there was a little help, and gentle and kind help from the audience there. I'm going to give you 1.5. Peaberry, Longberry, Harrar, Orizaba, and San Jose are varieties of coffee coming respectively from Kenya, Ethiopia, that's Harrar, Mexico, that's Orizaba, and Costa Rica, that's San Jose. Oolong is a black China tea with, I'm told, the flavour of green tea, and it comes from a Chinese word meaning black dragon. 1.5. Frank Muir, yours are literary. James Steerforth, Ophelia.
Yes, I know him.
Clementine, Crook, and Captain Ahab.
Ophelia had certainly floated down the river on a Sunday afternoon, didn't it? So did Clementine.
Yes.
Captain Ahab certainly was drowned. James?
No, Steerforth was drowned.
Steerforth was drowned.
Oh,
Heroic, yes, saving people.
Leaves Cook.
And Cook,
Cook what?
you know, don't you?
No.
Spontaneous combustion. Cook died
Between you,
of.
we've got it totally right.
Defense.
All of them except Crook, who is the character in Dickens's Bleak House, who was the Chancellor of the Rag and Bone Department. He died from spontaneous combustion, which I am told is catching fire by causes at work within you, which I hope none of you are suffering from at the moment. All the rest were drowned. Slight suspicion as to whether Captain Ahab was also strangled at the same time as he was drowning.
Well,
but
if there's a
he did
suspicion, why
drown.
did you ask the question?
I don't know. There, you get your 2 marks. Now, Anne Scott James. Light, heavy, paper, feather, and fly.
Oh, yes, of course. Most of them are to do with boxing. Flyweight, featherweight, heavyweight, lightweight, and a paperweight, something you throw at your husband or wife.
2 marks straight away. Well, now a round of unusual definitions and 2 marks again. Can you suggest or suppose or actually state the name of the author of these unconventional definitions? Denis Norden. A kiss can be a comma, a question mark, or an exclamation point.
I've never heard that, no. I would presume it's American because they call it an exclamation point rather than exclamation mark.
I think it's translated from the French.
Oh, Colette. Right.
You're getting very close. Once the most heavily insured legs in the world.
Really?
Yeah.
I never knew she actually said it. Miss Danget.
Yes,
That's really
well done.
danced.
Well, for jumping at that, I'm going to give you your 2 marks. It's Miss Danget, dancer, actress, and pin-up girl in France for very, very, very many years. And that was alleged to be her remark.
Did she really make the quotation books with that?
I
mean,
suppose
is that,
so.
is that,
Yes, I think so.
It's bound to be a press agent. Right.
They had them in those days.
No.
Now, Dennis Powell. A drama critic is a man who leaves no turn unstoned.
Sure.
Bernard Shaw it is, 2 marks.
There was actually a follow-up to that, one of the first Technicolor films, wasn't it? Where they talked about the girls in some musical where they were very garish and very garishly costumed, and they did a whole lot of sort of turning their behinds to the audience, all in different colours, tights and whatnot, and he said they left no stern untoned.
I love those early knocking remarks.
Well, we've got to ask Frank Muir another question now. Meekness is an uncommon patience in planning a revenge that is worthwhile.
Lovely sort of anti-biblical remark, isn't it? Meekness is an uncommon patience.
In planning a revenge that is worthwhile.
It could be. Is it wild?
It's American. Just push you across the other side.
It must be around about 1890 to 1920.
He died in 1914.
That was Ambrose Bierce.
Yes. Well done.
Oh, well done.
Well done.
I did a thing on radio about graffiti, and I invited listeners, if they had any sort of personal examples that they'd seen, to send them in. And I had a lot, but some which were very good. And one very good cryptic one, which is only very tangentially refers to meekness. It would simply said, somebody had seen on a wall, the meek don't want it.
I like that. Yeah. No inheriting the earth there. Anne Scott James, your turn. Fashion is gentility running away from vulgarity and afraid of being overtaken.
Sidney Smith.
He wrote Table Talk.
Oh, well, my partner knows it and I don't. He says it's Hazlitt.
William Hazlitt it is.
Table Talk.
Yes, Table Talk. 2 marks.
First time I ever had Hazlitt in about 15 years or something. It's thrown me badly.
Oh, he's making a comeback. He's very big.
Well, now a quick round of adjectival antonyms, and as I always have to look up and see what this word means, an antonym is a word opposite in meaning from another word. For 2 marks, what word or words has precisely the opposite meaning to these? Denis Norden, chap-fallen, with a hyphen in between. Chap-fallen.
I doubt whether there are any precise opposites, but I would say a near opposite of chap-fallen would be chuffed.
Yes, I'd pass that at once. Chap-fallen, in fact, is simply a variant on chop-fallen, which means your lower jaw's fallen because you're so dejected. And the opposite is, as Denis says, slang-wise, chuffed or cheerful or jovial, buoyant, any of such words. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, maleficent.
I mean, benevolent.
Yes. Yes, that's perfectly good. Beneficent is the exact opposite, I think, an exact antonym. But benevolent, kind, obliging, good-natured, whatever you like. The opposite is this terrible thing that probably witches are, maleficent, doing bad things. Frank Muir, catchpenny, one word, catchpenny.
Catchpenny.
The opposite of catchpenny would be valuable, perfect, praiseworthy, genuine.
Any of those.
Mispenny.
According to usage.
That's right. It's catchpenny, meaning something which is worthless and made only in order that you may sell it. 2 marks. Anne Scott James, your word is lubberly. L-U-B-B-E-R-L-Y. Lubberly.
Well, that means a sort of clumsy, oafish person, doesn't it?
That's right.
I should have thought sort of dainty would be the opposite. Or apt, or well-fitted.
Apt to do.
Would apt do?
Apt to. Lubberly means awkward, clumsy, loutish. The opposite is something like workmanlike, or adroit, or handy, or skilled. Any of those will do. 2 marks. And now we come to the last round, and to Denis and Frank's quotations, and the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Denis, your quotation was, "East is east, and west is west, and never the twain shall meet," which is a ballad of Kipling's.
I never hear this quotation without recalling the 6 months I spent working as an assistant to an old Welsh vet. Now, it wasn't any particular love of animals that impelled me to seek this position. It was simply that I wanted to write a best-selling book. That's why I placed myself in the employ of old Daffy Davis, Daffy, as they used to call him in the valleys there, because he was ideal for my purposes. Not only did his practice cover a very wide range of extremely endearing animals, but he was an absolute gold mine himself of homely wisdom and folksy sort of sayings, which is what you need to sell these books. I remember once, whenever he used to go out to assist a mayor in labour, he would say, "I won't be long, boy. A foal and his mummy are soon parted." You can let the film rights go on just a line like that. Now, in addition to this absolutely invaluable dialogue, all the cases he attended were the kind that the great animal-loving public simply laps up. There ought to be a branch of science, boy, he said to me once, that is devoted only to the prevalence of corns among dogs with hard paw. And I said to him, "Well, what would you call it?" He said, "I would call it hard paw cornography." And he immediately went on to say, he said, "Let me ask you something else." He said, "Do you know how to tell a male stoat from a female?" I will know. I've never really been that desperate. He was just going to tell me the answer when the gate opened and young Taffy Thomas came in with what proved to be the strangest case of all. It was a shaggy old cart horse called Bucephalus who'd been standing motionless under Taffy's tree for so long that a field of linnets had built a nest in its mane. Now, I didn't want to extract it myself, Taffy said, because so much of his hair has been plaited into the nest. If I'd pull at it, the old fellow would kick me right up Long Meadow. So, old Daffy immediately beckoned to me and he said, "You know my waistcoat that's hanging over the sow in Emergency Ward 3? He said, well, if you feel in the right-hand pocket, there's a ½ ounce of brewer's yeast." So I brought the brewer's yeast. He took a pinch of it and sprinkled it over Bucephalus's mane, and it was like magic. The whole family of linnets rose upwards, and carrying the nest in their beaks, they flew away with it towards Megan's Bottom, which is a local place of interest. Well, when old Taffy, when he saw my look of amazement, a wise old smile creased his wise old eyes, and he said, "When you go back to London, boy," he said, "if ever you're walking round Soho and you come across a cart horse with a nest of birds tweeting in its mane," he said, "you remember that." I said, "Remember what?" And it was then he delivered the line, which I think I shall make actually the title of the book. He said, "Yeast is yeast, and nest is nest, and never the mane shall tweet."
Frank Muir, and his line, which, if you remember, was "The Miner's Dream of Home," which comes from a song, I think, about an old miner in Australia thinking back to his native country.
I saw the old homestead and faces I loved, and I saw England's valleys and dells, and I listened with joy, as I did when a boy, to the sound of the old village bells. The fire was burning brightly, and it was when I set fire to the house that I realized how true that song was and how inaccurate the Bible that I'd lived by up till then was, which was the Householder's Handbook, 1,000 Tips, Guides and Wrinkles, 1928, 14th edition, 1 and 9. Because in the Householder's Handbook, 14th edition, 1928, 1 and 9, it said that when you have a fire in your house, most damage is caused not by the fire, but by the sort of major jet of water which is poured onto the things. That's totally untrue. I set fire to the house. I suppose it's going back a year or two now. I remember the evening. It was a peculiar evening. It was winter, and it was sort of late winter, and I was trying to fumigate my wife's greenhouse unsuccessfully. I remember that, and then went to bed. 2 o'clock in the morning, I suddenly woke up, and I woke my wife, and I said, "Can you smell something peculiar, or is it just me?" And she said, "Yes, smoke. I can smell smoke." And I could smell smoke. And rushed across the children and said, "Fire up!" Rushed back to my wife and said, "Well, don't rush up and down. Ring the fire brigade." And then I thought and said, "No, I won't do that. We'll put it out ourselves with advice from the Householder's Handbook. 14th edition, 1928, 1 and 9, which is never far from my bedside." So I said, "Get dressed, gumboots, dressing gown, outside." Got the water hose, said to my daughter, "Connect it up. When I shout, right, switch it on." Right, nothing. Right, nothing. Fumble my way through the darkness of the hose. Daughter fast asleep, forehead against the side of the shed. Shaker, switch the water on. Massive jet of water, which goes up into the air and falls to the ground a foot short of the back door. Meanwhile, the smoke is billowing. Suddenly think, yes, the fire extinguisher, the foam fire extinguisher in the car. Rush to the car, get the fire extinguisher, invert it, plunge the thing, open the back door, smoke billows out, direct the stream of foam, and it goes right along the passage from the back door to the kitchen. My wife says, just a minute, there's no fire. She said, there's no fire without smoke without fire. She said, but there's no flame. And she said, and the smoke smells sort of chemical. She said, what did you do with that fumigating device earlier in the evening? So I said, well, you know, it's one of those things you light and then put in the greenhouse and it exudes vapour and foam and stuff and kills woodlice and things. I said, and it didn't light. So I took it back into the drawing room and tried to light it again. And the fuse glowed for a bit. And then you shouted, come up to bed. And I came up to bed. She said, the house isn't on fire. It's just being fumigated with this everything. So I said, oh, fine. I said, now calm everybody. Now relax. My daughter, who was asleep in the compost heap at the time, I had to wake her up and said, relax, everything's okay. My son, who was eating celery through the kitchen window, I said, relax, everything's okay. And my wife, and I said, now stop panicking, relax. She was looking up the householder's handbook under divorce. And, and I said, I will retrieve the fumigating device. And I stepped forward in my gumboots into the passage. I don't know whether you've ever stepped into foam on tiles in gumboots. Somehow my feet came up and my head went crack down on the tiles. And suddenly there was a blinding flash in my head and I saw the old homestead and folks that I knew, and I saw England's valleys and dales. And I listened with joy, as I did when a boy, to the sound of the old village bells. And you know that song is right, and the householder's handbook was wrong, because the danger in a fire is not with any major jet of water, it's the minor stream of foam.
By your votes, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir wins the story, but Denis Norden and Anne Scott James win the contest this week.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore and the programme was produced by Tony Schrein. My Word. A panel game devised by Tony Schrein and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
And we go straight into the first round, which tests their vocabulary. For 2 marks, what's the meaning of the following words? And the first one for Frank Muir is Kabbalistic.
One meaning of it, Jack, is it's a ballistic problem of how high and at what tangent you shoot your arm when trying to stop a cab. But beyond that, Kabbalistic is esoteric,
yes,
with occult
Yeah.
undertones or conspiratorial undertones?
Yes, that's good enough for the 2 marks. It relates to the secret, traditional, but magical knowledge in interpreting their scriptures by the Jewish rabbis, and then it became used as generally meaning the occult. 2 marks. Anne Scott James, yours is a quincunx, which is very hard to pronounce. Q-U-I-N-C-U-N-X, quincunx.
Well, I know what it is, but I don't know how it gets there. What it is a formal arrangement of trees.
Yes.
There's a
Half on that
famous
one, Anne.
quincunx that Hidcote, which is, I suppose, one of the most famous ones
Yes.
in England, of pleached hornbeams, and I think, if I remember right, there are 10 of them,
Yes. But
which is multiples of 5, isn't it?
multiples of 5 is all right. 5 objects so placed that 4 occupy the corners, either of a square or a rectangle, and the 5th one is at the centre. The easiest example is a 5 of cards, whichever pack it is. And it then comes to be applied to the arrangement of large numbers of trees on this essential basic pattern. 2 marks. Denis Norden. A bundobust. It's spelt B-A-N-D-O-B-A-S-T, but as far as my knowledge of Hindi stretches, it's pronounced bundobust.
Oh, is it? But it's spelt bandabast.
That's right, absolutely right.
It sounds like one of those sticky dressings you apply.
A kind of monkey, would you think? Don't think
Monkey?
It's an animal.
Bandobust is a bra, surely.
It's a bandobast. It's not quite so helpful as that.
No, it isn't. It really isn't.
It's a bandobast.
Hindu word, we think.
It is, in fact, the arrangements your secretary, Denis, no doubt is making for you safely to go to Portugal and back again in the near future. In other words, it's the organisation of the details of a journey, a military campaign, a sit-down strike, or even a tea party. And it comes from a Hindustani word meaning originally tying and binding. That is, you had to put the loads up onto the pack animals before you could move off safely. That's what it is.
I think that's an excellent description of a package holiday, though. It's both a military campaign, a sit-down strike, all of that is involved. No, I must get onto a travel agent and say, have you got my bandabast for...
That's right. Dilys Powell, ferriage.
That's an organisation for transporting the bandovast, I should think.
On what?
On a ferry.
That's a shrewd thought.
2 marks at once. It's the action or business of ferrying passengers or goods from point A to point B. It also can be the amount you're charged for getting from point A to point B, but the point is that it is on water.
Across the sticks.
A stock across the sticks. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah. Before we go on to the next round, here are the quotations you were given for the last round of all, and Frank Muir, yours is all my possessions for a moment of time, and yours, Denis Norden, never underestimate the power of a woman. Well, the next round is a round of assorted aphorisms, and for 2 marks, can you suggest or tell me which literary personage it was who gave voice to the following fairly profound thoughts? We begin again with Frank Muir. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds.
Yes, I think I know. It's 19th century.
Yes?
And I think it's Brigands.
No, cross
He
it
was
down.
the philosopher of cookery.
Yes, he was.
And it's this thing of the consistency of a mayonnaise is so terribly important. And what he's saying is it isn't all that important. It's whatever it is.
Well,
It curdles, it doesn't matter.
That's right. Well, he lived at a time which is appropriately called Belly, or Belay. But would you cross the Atlantic?
I've forgotten the quotation.
A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. And think of those great sages in the United
It's an American.
States. Yes.
Sage, Thoreau.
No, he lived in the woods.
Yes, of Concord, Mass. Emerson.
Emerson.
Ralph
Well
Waldo.
done. Well done. Emerson's essays, this is called Essay on Self-Reliance, and it's echoed later on by Whitman. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes.
Actually, the idea behind it is really quite 18th century. Samuel Johnson is the same thing, that you must change your views as you get older.
That's right.
There's no merit in not changing your mind as you change your age.
I think he creeps home to his 2 marks. And Anne Scott James, it's your turn next. Anger makes dull men witty, but it keeps them poor.
It's a very controvertible remark, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But I think dull men might help you as to date.
Because, I mean, most people now regard controversy as an absolute sure path to a whacking income, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
Cash in on your violence.
Yes.
Especially in journalism.
Go back to QE1.
Ah, yes, well, we now think this is Elizabethan, do we not?
Yes.
Anger makes dull men witty. Can't believe it's Shakespeare, said anything so boring.
Well, some people thought he was Shakespeare.
Frank.
Well, a lot of people were thought to be Shakespeare, but let us try Francis Bacon, shall we?
That's a very good shot. Francis Bacon's Apothegms, and it was supposed to be a remark he made to Queen Elizabeth I herself.
A very unwise thing to have done.
He lost it pretty well. Denis Norden. Mankind is divisible into 2 great classes, hosts and guests.
Oh, I know this.
Do you say it then? Go on.
I think it's Max Beerbohm.
Oh, quite right.
Well done.
I only know this because we always have such arguments at home, and I thump the table and say, you're a terrible host to my husband, but you are the most marvellous guest. So I've been brought up on this. Yeah. Okay. He says, all right, you look after the wine and drink and all the rest of it, and I will go out to dinner.
Robert Benchley said that the world is divided into 2 types of people. The type of person who divides the world into 2 types of people and the type of person who doesn't.
Very, very intelligent.
I'd like to give you an extra mark for that, but it isn't actually what I asked. You've got 2 Max Beerbohm hosts and guests, and it's parallel with the other great saying that after 3 days, fish and guests begin to stink.
Everybody here on their way home should start deciding which they are, a natural host or a natural guest.
Yeah.
Now, Dilys Powell, to end this round, the man who is always talking about being a gentleman never is one. Intolerable remark.
Chesterfield.
Contemporary.
Contemporary.
Fox hunting and things like that, and...
fox hunting. Is that wild? No, it's not wild.
No, he only
Is it
tangentially approached fox hunting.
Is it Surtees?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
2 marks. It's R.S. Surtees, the inventor of jorks, among other things, in something called Ask Mamma, written in 1858.
It was Surtees who said something which I felt very keenly when I used to try to ride a horse. He said, if you don't behave, I shall take you home and boil you.
To the horse?
Yes, that's right. Well, now we come to a round of origins and derivations, and 2 marks again. How did the following words or phrases originate, or from what did they eventually derive? And Frank Muir, yours is appropriately a lumber room.
Lumber means timber.
Among other things.
Yes. It also means offcuts of timber.
Yes.
It also meant waste timber. So it also meant a pawnbroker.
That's what I wanted.
You lumbered. You put something in lumber when you pawned it. I'm going back a bit.
You are going to have to go back a bit for this.
Yes. So a lumber room was where you parked stuff which you didn't particularly need at the moment.
Or you would
Or it was useless.
Or you would pawn.
Or pawned, yeah.
And who were the original pawnbrokers?
Well, they were the Italian city banker barons, weren't they?
Yeah, but it's almost the same word, Frank. It's quite easy if you translate lumber into
Lombard.
That's what I wanted. Forget that. 2 marks to Frank. The Lombards were the great pawnbrokers in medieval times, and their places of business were known as Lombard shops. And if you had a room at the top where people who pawned their stuff, where what they got was kept until they could redeem it, that would be a lumber room in a Lombard shop. 2 marks. And Scott James, this is a very difficult one. Sycophant, 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 how did it originate?
Oh, this is child's play to me.
Oh, hooray.
Well, sukos, I'm just going to be thoroughly pedantic now, is Greek for a fig.
Yes?
And phino means to show.
Absolutely right.
And when travellers used to arrive in Athens and other Greek cities, sort of creepy crawlies used to come up and say, I will show you the figs, where you can sit in the shade or pick the figs or whatever. Hence, the word sycophant, which really means...
A fig shower.
a creepy crawly or a sucker-upper. Would that do?
Full marks at once.
I would think, absolutely.
Yes. And nowadays, if you ever use the word, which I don't often myself, it means a sponger or a toady. Now, Denis Norden. To be, Denis, in a scrape.
Well, applying the same intelligent logic, or a vestige of it that Anne displayed, it means to be in trouble, to encounter aggro, to in some way scrape, as in when you scrape your knees as a child and you had to apply a bandabast, or your mum put it on. So to be in a situation where you can scrape yourself and draw blood and have abrasions of the skin.
I think rather than abrasion, if you would think of a hole in the ground, it might help you.
I don't know an abrasion from a hole in the ground. Why would I think of a hole in the ground?
Well, it's a hole scraped by wild deer, which they do apparently. Sometimes it gets a foot or more deep, and if you were riding a nice horse through the glade or a forest, your horse might stumble and throw you, and you would then be in that particular deer's scrape. Dilys, yours sounds simpler. An idiot. Derivation.
Idiot.
Idiot.
I-D-O-T.
That's right.
It was... Now that is Greek again.
Yes.
It's Athenian, I think. I mean, idiotis, was a private citizen, I think.
Right, yes.
So he was an idiot. He should have joined the government.
That's right.
Nowadays, an idiot is a self-employed citizen.
Well, it is.
According to the government.
All of that is absolutely right. It meant a private person not engaged in public office, and so they presumed, as people still presume, that he was without professional knowledge or an ignoramus, and hence it came to mean what it does today, somebody so defective in mind from birth as to be unable to guard himself or herself against ordinary physical dangers. It's a word that's gone downhill very steadily. 2 marks.
And we all...
And now we come to the last round, and to Frank and Denis's quotations. And the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Frank, your quotation was, all my possessions for a moment of time, and I believe that was Queen Elizabeth I, shortly before she died.
Well, latterly it was me to the vicar. Actually, the new vicar. It all began, I suppose you could say, a few days ago when my wife was looking at a picture of Dominic Mintoff. And she said, look at his tummy, it's as flat as a board. Did you see this picture? And I said, well, it's a flat tummy, doesn't it? If you say yours isn't as flat, look at that. Look at his tummy. It's absolutely straight up and down. Well, of course, I didn't worry about this. You know, my wife accusing me of having a flabby tum. It didn't upset me at all. You know, about an hour later, I came out of the cupboard and got a dry hanky. And I was thinking about it. Whereas when I was very young, I was in silhouette, like an exclamation mark. There's now a touch of the question mark. It's a term sort of trying to go forward, which is it. So I thought if I could correct my posture. So I got a BBC publication on yoga, and there was which is kind of exercise thing. So I tried the first one I tried was the sort of slimming exercise was the lotus position, which is really quite fun. You sit down and you sort of interweave your legs, and the final sort of lock is quite difficult. But if you pull it through, it goes in quite easily. Much easier than it comes out. I was upstairs at the time. I managed to bounce my way on my bottom down the stairs, which is rather painful. And then I managed to crawl onto the tea trolley and sort of row myself out of the back door and into the garage. And then there was the car jack. I put longitudinally between my knees and just worked that. And I think the fault was having my gumboots on at the time. Then I thought I'd do it properly, so I got myself a set of gear like the lady on the cover of the yoga book. I've got a black T-shirt, which I found in my son's drawer, who has rather eccentric taste in these things. I have to wear it inside out, actually, because it's got a photograph of a chap on the front with a head like a fur-bearing cannonball, and he's got his nose apparently fixed to his face with a safety pin. And it says underneath, "I am a punk rocker." But I put that on upside down, and I put black bathing trunks, which I happen to have, and a pair of my wife's black tights. If you haul on those, they sort of go upwards almost indefinitely. The crutch is a bit low, actually. It comes just above the knees, like the front legs of a rather elderly elephant. But I got into this stuff and decided to do the whole exercise, the whole 8 positions recommended to the lady. She said choose a proper time, make it regular, sort of 7:30. I thought she meant 7:30 in the evening. You can't do exercise in the morning. You creak, don't you? And your foot goes funny, as you walk. So I did it at 7:30 in the evening. And the other mistake, probably in retrospect, was I'd forgotten that people were coming. But I got into my black set, and I did the lotus position, and then I suddenly heard a noise, and I opened my eyes, and the room was full of the Thorpe Village Fete Committee, headed by our new vicar. I don't know how long they'd been there, but they were staring at me. I was in the upside-down position with my toes hooked over the door at the time. And eventually the vicar cleared his throat and said, ballet positions? So I said, no, ballet positions. And then with a note of pride, but I'm sure Queen Elizabeth I had no voice when she said it, I said, all my positions for a more mint-off tum.
Live to see Frank squatting like the Buddha. I haven't done yet, and we go on to Denis Norden. If you remember, his quotation was, "Never underestimate the power of a woman."
It wasn't much of a kiss. So briefly did her lips touch mine, you could hardly even call it a kiss. In fact, I remember thinking, I've had more sensation from an electric toothbrush. But still, at the age of 17, to be kissing Fenella Ollerenshaw at all, well, it was like the man who broke the bank at Monte Carlo, then going on to win the Irish sweepstake. I went to draw her to me again, but she pulled herself free, and she said, "Don't let's waste any more time. Get your clothes off." and she left the bedroom. Well, as I removed my garments, I reviewed the strange course of our relationship. We'd met at the tennis club where I'd been drawn as her partner in the junior mixed doubles, and right away I'd spotted that she was from a world far above mine. "She's Alderman Ollerenshaw's daughter," whispered Lefty Perkins, who sat next to me in geometry, so she was a girl I trusted. Who hadn't heard of the Ollerenshaws? They were the aristocracy of the county. Their menfolk held the doors open for their wives, even when nobody was looking. Their womenfolk served 2 kinds of afters, even when there were no relations sitting down. The true gentry. And when we came off the court, I'd thought about it. Incidentally, we won 6 love, 6 love, 6 love, 6 love, because Fenella was the only one in the game who could serve overarm. I said to her, will you be my girl? And she said, "Oh, don't be ludicrous." I said, "Well, why not?" She said, "Because I'm upper class and you and your family are rubbish." I said, "Well, only financially and physically." She tossed her head, that yellow hair with the glint of gold in it like the sun on cornflakes, and she said, "My father would never approve of you." I said, "Put me to the test, please, put me to the test. Let me meet him." So she narrowed her eyes and said, "All right, come to tea next Saturday." Well, as I walked home that night, my heart was leaping like a gazelle neath the lock-knit of my vest. And as I burst open the front door, "Dad, Dad," I shouted, "I'm in love with a girl." He said, "Son, you've made a wise choice." He said, "Who is she? Who is she?" I said, "Fenella Ollerenshaw. I'm meeting her father on Saturday, and if he approves of me, the world will be my gherkin." Because, I mean, the kind of neighborhood I lived in, who knew about oysters, you see. Well, all this went through my mind as I was placing the last of my garments over the Chippendale wash basin in her bedroom. Oh, incidentally, the reason for all that was that on my arrival, Fenella had explained that, like so many upper-class families, the Ollerenshaws were naturists. And so they always took Saturday afternoon tea naked in the garden, something that the lesser orders like us were unable to do, of course, because quite apart from the fact none of us had a large enclosed back garden, we weren't accustomed either to balancing hot tea on our laps naked. And then from outside I heard Fenella's silvery voice summoning me with that little private pet name she'd bestowed on me, "Yobbo." She was crying, she was shouting, "Daddy's waiting." So gingerly and naked as a shelled egg, I descended the stairs into the drawing room, through the French windows, and onto a lawn that looked as though it had been manicured with nail scissors. You have, of course, anticipated me. They were fully clothed, all of them. Her father, her mother, her 4 grandparents, the 2 visiting bishops. It's always difficult to offer advice to any young man meeting a young girl's father for the first time. But I think as a result of my experience, I can now contribute one fairly safe rule. Never undress to meet the pa of a woman.
Well, what a cruel story. And by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the story, and he and Anne Scott James also win the contest for this week.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore, and the programme was produced by Tony Shrine.
You've been listening to My Word from the BBC.